Today we're going to go back in history. The first ever battle to happen with aircraft carriers in the world, ever. The Battle of Coral Sea.
The planes reached the target area, found the oiler Neosho, which by the way was a Pearl Harbor survivor.
This is the battle that predates the Battle of Midway, something we have already touched upon this channel. Battle of Coral Sea is truly what set the legacy for aircraft carrier battles. It's really mixed up. Nobody ever did have any experience about aircraft carrier battles, then this was the first time to test those ships. And it changed the naval warfare forever. This is going to be a long video, so we're gonna thoroughly educate ourselves on the first ever aircraft carrier battle in the world. As usual, here is the Rohya Watch. I'm always going to promote it because I like it so much. I'm going to tell you a personal military story of the CEO of this Rohya Watch company. His name is Antti, with 2 T's because it's a Finnish name. He volunteered to serve in the Finnish Rapid Deployment Force, and only 180 out of 700 applicants were chosen, and he was chosen. Half of the time he served in the mechanized Jaeger company. Jaegers are everywhere in the Nordic countries known to be very fierce. They are more strongly trained, they are more reliable. They were also in charge of the defense against CBRN, which is chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear attacks and weapons. They had all of the suits that you have seen in the show Chernobyl, all of the protective gear, and they used it. It's really cool. But this was not enough for Antti. He wanted more. He trained to be an EOD specialist, level 2, which is Explosive Ordnance Disposal, level 2. He had the bomb suits, the juggernaut suit if you will. Then he came back to the civilian world and started a watch company. Rohya was that watch. A beautiful watch, look at it. You wanna get a watch, get it from Rohya. We have 3 new patrons to thank. The patrons list is long, and thanks to this, the channel can thrive. 3 videos a week for you, my friends. I'll not stop. First of all, we have Iron CB Lost. A strange name, but support is support, so thank you. Second of all, we have Alan Davis. Thank you, Mr. Davis. And finally, we have Dash. Yes, that's it. That's how the name is written. Just a dash and nothing more. Mr. Dash, very secretive. Thank you, nonetheless. Probably Mr. Illuminati there or something. If you want to support the channel, best way is through Patreon. The link is in the description below. But now let's educate ourselves on the first ever aircraft carrier battle in the history. You haven't forgotten about the Estonian YouTuber Cup, right? You need this to watch my videos. Coffee or tea?
In May of 1942, the first aircraft carrier battle in history would take place in the South Pacific. It would be one of the most confused and confusing battles of all time. And because it was the first duel between aircraft carriers, it would be the first time that neither side's ships sighted or fired directly upon the other. The Battle of Coral Sea is often overshadowed by the more famous Battle of Midway, but nonetheless, its significance cannot be understated. The outcome of this engagement would have direct consequences for the Midway operation. Operation MO called for the invasion of Port Moresby. From there, the Japanese could launch attacks on northern Australia, and it could serve as a launching pad for further incursions into the islands of New Caledonia, the Fijis, and Samoa. Ultimately, what the Japanese wanted to achieve was to cut off Australia's supply lines with the US and hopefully strangle it into submission.
Strangle Australia into submission. Well, good luck with that. I've heard that Australians and New Zealanders are kinda tough people, not to be messed with. You don't strangle them into submission. They will strangle you into submission, that's what I've heard.
For this operation, they needed air support, so Admiral Yamamoto reluctantly agreed to lend 2 of his carriers. He wanted them back as soon as the operation was completed because he needed them for the upcoming Midway offensive. As was typical in Japanese operational planning, the operation was unnecessarily complex. First, Tulagi would be taken on May 3rd, while receiving air cover from the Carrier Strike Force and a covering force under Rear Admiral Goto, which contained a light carrier and 4 cruisers. A seaplane base would be set up for air reconnaissance. Goto's covering force would then head north and team up with the invasion convoy that would have departed Rabaul on May 4th. The 6-day voyage would pass through the Jomard Passage. Additional seaplane bases would be set up along the way to supplement the air searches. This was a dangerous stretch for the Japanese, since they would be subjected to air raids from land-based bombers based in Australia. But no worries, that's what the Carrier Strike Force was there for, to provide air cover. And finally, on May 10th, the invasion party would land and Port Moresby would be taken. But as you can see, the plan relied on perfect coordination with 5 separate groups.
Look at this. I've many times told this already. Plans and equipment and gear and weaponry, everything in war needs to be as simple and robust as possible. This is not simple. This is something that could go wrong and probably will go wrong. Everything has to go exactly perfectly for the Japanese to achieve their victory.
The Japanese were depending on encountering a passive enemy who would follow the Japanese script. If they were to run into any determined counterattack, their plan was surely unbound.
Yeah, but you cannot make a plan based on a passive enemy if you have very aggressive enemies. It's just a stupid move, I think. I think the best way to plan is to plan the worst outcome, that the enemy is very aggressive and attacks exactly where you don't hope it to happen. And this is a good plan. But this is a plan that has flaws already planned in it. I can't see this being a success.
To enemy opposition, the Japanese were optimistic. At most, there could be 2 American carriers present, but they weren't counting on it. And if they showed up, Vice Admiral Takagi was confident his own carriers would make easy work of them. Plus, they also had surprise on their side. Well, sort of. Because little did they know, the Americans were completely aware of the upcoming invasion. At this stage of the war, the greatest American weapon was their radio intelligence. Thanks to skilled US Navy codebreakers, enough pieces and fractions of messages were deciphered that a rough timeline for the operation was made available to the Americans.
I mean, they were aware of this, and also they were aware of Midway, so Japanese had the illusion of surprise for the longest time, for 2 battles. Look how important is communications and intelligence. Very important, the most important. The Estonian soldier hat competition goes on as usual, we never stop. Before we start, look at this photo. User Steak is Meat. I know who you are, I know you. He has Estonian shirt, Estonian flag, Estonian soldier hat, Estonian soldier Discord server, Hatpix channel. What a dude! Upload your hat photo and I'll feature it in the video. First of all, we have Michael James Gerber, Terminal Pole. So I guess that's how you're known in the Discord server. You got a hat from Minnesota. Way to go, my man. We have some good people in Minnesota. You know who you are. 4 from Minnesota, 2 more and Minnesota will be on the lead. We have RJ Finocchiario. Finocchiario, we got a hat for Finocchiario. In Delaware, not in Italy, unfortunately. We have never gotten a hat to Italy, because Italian people don't watch me for some reason. But yes, Delaware. We have Anthony Keane, not from the US, not from the UK. Well, technically, no, from Ireland, not part of the UK. Ireland, the Potato Kingdom. Irish Potato Man is getting a hat. Well, I'm glad. I even had to move the US flag down to make room for Ireland. This is a metaphor, I guess. We have Mr. Don Garcia from Texas. No, I'm kidding, not from Texas. From Connecticut, actually. Hey, got you there, right? Still having new states, we don't have Connecticut. So I made some room. You can see everything is different now. We have more room. Every state is still here. I just made them a bit smaller so we can add Connecticut. We have Andrew Duffy, Mr. Duffy. Can you guess where he's from? Arizona. Which gives Arizona 6 points, making it the first place in the Estonian soldier hat competition. Yeah, my friends, yeah, go Arizona. I have to get myself Arizona flag soon. Number 1. We have Brandon Lyons, Mr. Lyons. Ooh, it's like your family name is King or Prince or Lyons. It's this strong and cool name, Virginia. With Kant Maza, but he wrote to me how to say his name, so I'm gonna try. Mr. Kant, I'm gonna try to do you a favor. Chuntai Maza. Chuntai Maza. Well, Chuntai, Mr. Chuntai or Kant, you're not a basic person. No, not at all. You need your name to be pronounced specially, and also you didn't get 1 hat, you didn't get 2 hats. You got 3 hats, which is the record so far. Nobody has gotten 3 hats in a row. So you hold the record, my friend. They all go to Iowa. Maybe Iowa is the state of the day, who knows? That makes Iowa and Arizona tied. They share the first place, so it's not only Arizona anymore. Ooh, it's a close call now. And finally we have Mr. Perry Esping from Texas. Well, actually the photo you saw today here, the hat pic, that was Perry Esping. That's him, and that's the hat he was wearing. Point goes to Texas, of course. Texas also with 6 points. Arizona, Texas and Iowa share the first place. Last time it was a close call. This time it's a close call. Well, next time I think things will change. We'll have a permanent leader maybe. Get the hat, post the photo. put the points on the board and represent your state, my friends. Back to the video.
However, to meet the Japanese, the Americans had only one carrier available, the USS Yorktown. The US Navy had 5 carriers in the Pacific at this stage in the war. One had been torpedoed and would be in repairs for several months. 2 were coming back from the recent Doolittle raid and were unavailable. So, they could only reinforce the Yorktown with one more, the old but reliable USS Lexington. The American plan was simple: stay at the edge of Japanese air range and launch counterattacks when deemed suitable. The Americans relied not only on Australian bombers to conduct their air searches, but also on their own scout planes. The Japanese differed from this doctrine. They strictly used their own carrier aircraft for offensive capabilities, not scouting. Thus, they solely relied on land-based aircraft, seaplanes, and flying boats to do all of the reconnaissance. Their seaplanes had an extraordinary range of 3,000 miles, meaning they could search up to 1,000 miles.
Whoa.
Still, this wasn't enough. In war, one must do his utmost to get the most accurate reconnaissance. The one who can spot the enemy first and spot them accurately is the one who gets to strike first and thus achieve victory.
First strike in aircraft carriers is the most important thing ever. It's not like land-based infantry when you attack and they attack you back. In aircraft carrier battles, as we have seen on the Midway battle also, if you strike first, you have an option to already take down at least one of the carriers maybe, which already sets the enemy back 50%. They're not able to strike back. They're only able to strike back with half the force they had before, so striking first is number one priority, and that takes intelligence and reconnaissance.
Keep in mind that weather could play an important role during air searches. Whoever operated under cloud cover had an advantage. It gave them protection from enemy reconnaissance, and it would make it difficult for the enemy aviators to attack them. During the first days of the battle, the Americans would benefit from this.
So
if there is something to be learned from this battle, it's that reliable reconnaissance is key. You'll see how it will fail both sides in the following days. There were 5 separate groups for Operation MO, including 2 invasion convoys. A light carrier, the Shoho, would provide air cover for each of the invasion forces, but it was the carrier striking force that provided the main punch. It was composed of the Shokaku and the Zuikaku. Together they had 121 aircraft. It was under the command of Vice Admiral Takagi, but tactical control was given to Rear Admiral Hara, a veteran of naval aviation warfare. The Americans had Task Force 17 with the Yorktown in the South Pacific. It would later be reinforced with an Australian-American cruiser force under the command of Rear Admiral Crace, Royal Navy. Once the Lexington arrived, the 2 carriers would have 134 planes between them. Rear Admiral Fletcher was in command, but tactical control was given to Rear Admiral Fitch. The preliminary phase. On May 2nd, Fletcher was waiting to rendezvous with the Lexington. However, Lexington needed to refuel. Intelligence reports indicated to Fletcher that Operation MO was beginning, so he headed north alone at a slow pace. At 1900 hours, he got a report of the Tulagi invasion force making its way towards Tulagi. He decided to launch an attack on his own. He increased his speed and headed north. Although attacking the landing force on Tulagi would reveal the presence of a US carrier in the area to the Japanese, Fletcher deemed it justified if he could deliver a punishing blow. The next day, on May 4th, Fletcher launched an early morning strike. He was under some protection because he was operating under heavy weather. The Japanese were caught completely by surprise and were practically defenseless. 3 attacks in total were launched throughout the day. Despite such a large amount of ordnance being dedicated to this attack, the damage was modest. And in spite of the attack, the Tulagi seaplane base would be operating 2 days later.
Even in the Battle of Midway or all of the battles, the attacks are always not as effective as they wanted them to be. Or even Pearl Harbor, for example. It's such a surprisal attack. Everything went right except they missed almost all of their targets. So I have not yet seen a truly 100% accurate and successful aerial raid. At least on those battles we have covered on this channel. This attack was a failure. 5 first attacks from the Americans in the Battle of Midway were failures because they missed and they lost a lot of planes, and Pearl Harbor was a failure. There are so many things that can go wrong with naval warfare and aerial raids.
On May 5th, Fletcher met up with the Lexington and the cruiser force. They topped off on fuel, and on the 6th, Fletcher combined all the forces at hand into one enlarged Task Force 17. Fletcher had correctly deduced that the invasion force was going to pass through the Jomard Passage, so they began to head northwest, but only after they had sent their only oiler and her escort to the south to a designated safe area. He thought the carriers were in the Bougainville area. They were probably going to head south to guard the left flank of the convoy. Boy, he couldn't have been more wrong.
So yeah, Americans knew the Japanese plan. They had the upper hand. They took away the surprise momentum, but still, if you make such a mistake here, it basically means Japanese still have the surprise. You think they're like 500 miles the wrong direction. So even with this strong reconnaissance and intelligence, human error, as we can see here, is the biggest mistake.
The Japanese carriers were actually on his exposed flank, coming right at him and within striking distance.
Oh, they're so close.
But let's see how they got here in the first place. To minimize the chances of discovery, the Port Moresby operation called for the carrier strike force to conduct a wide sweep around the Solomon Islands so that they could enter Coral Sea from the east. However, a seemingly simple mission had given loads of trouble to the carriers. They were tasked with ferrying 9 Zeros to Rabaul to strengthen the airbase there. On the 2nd of May, the fighters set off, but bad weather forced them to return. They tried again on the 3rd, and again they had to return due to bad weather. Ultimately, they were unsuccessful, and this 2-day delay is what made them be here instead of here, where they could have possibly launched a counterstrike against the Yorktown. Anyways, the strike was a shock for the Japanese, and to complicate things more, Takagi was in the middle of refueling when he received the news of the attack.
Oh.
He ceased fueling.
See, in the last video we watched a Future Tech of War, and there was a lot of talk about refueling planes, drones that refuel your planes in the mid-air so they have more 300 miles extra. This is the battle when it truly comes out that refueling is the main problem when you're attacking each other. Refueling takes time and you can't just fly infinitively, although you need it. You need to be able to attack all the time. And refueling is the main issue. So if you have drones up in there that refuel your planes automatically, making them double efficient, they can attack more and longer, you will win the battle.
And headed south immediately in pursuit. But by then, Fletcher was long gone. On the evening of May 5th, Takagi turned west into Coral Sea, where he planned to refuel on the 6th. It must be noted that even at this point, given the tactical situation of there being an enemy carrier on the loose, the Japanese carriers were still not launching their own searches. Instead, they waited passively for reports from land-based aircraft. Actually, on May 5th, a flying boat appeared in the vicinity of Task Force 17 but was shot down. The crew either sent no message or did, but it failed to reach Takagi. Nevertheless, the failure of this aircraft to return gave the Japanese a vague notion of where the American carriers might be. And so, as it came to be, on the 6th of May, the Japanese were in a perfect position to launch an ambush on the unsuspecting Americans. While the Americans incorrectly searched to the north, the Japanese correctly searched to the west.
So you have so many directions to base your search on, and it makes a huge difference if you search the wrong way. It doesn't even matter if you have the better intelligence. You will not see the enemy, they will see you first. And as we talked about before, the first strike is so important. Even if the Japanese lost their surprise on moment, they could still win the upper hand by just simply searching the right way and finding the enemy first.
At 1000 hours, a flying boat spotted Task Force 17. But once again, Takagi was caught in the middle of refueling when he received the report.
What?
By noon, he was heading south in pursuit. However, by the evening, enthusiasm had fallen. There was bad weather. It was getting late, and he roughly knew where the American carriers were, but he didn't want to send a search to confirm it, because he feared that it would alert the Americans to his presence. So, he decided not to rush it. It would be better to launch a comprehensive search the following day, locate the enemy, and launch a powerful strike to finish the carriers. And so, Hera called off the pursuit. Unbeknownst to him, if he had been more aggressive this day, it would have paid off handsomely. Post-battle analysis would later reveal that the Japanese carriers got within 70 miles of Task Force 17 that day. 70 miles! The report...
That is super close. What the hell?
That Hera originally had received was incorrect, but to his advantage, it was actually some 50 miles closer. If he had launched a search, he surely would have found the Americans. And if he had launched a strike that evening, he would have found Task Force 17 in a vulnerable state, since they would have been in the middle of refueling.
Oh.
The Battle of Coral Sea would have ended right then and there with a total Japanese victory.
Yeah.
Hara and Takagi's timidity and lack of aggression this day cost them their best chance for a victory.
Lack of aggression. See, the biggest knowledge in war and wisdom is when to be aggressive and when to be defensive, and he chose the wrong time to be defensive. He should have chosen aggressiveness at that moment, but I mean, that's hindsight. No one should have known this. This is just your internal feeling, what you make the decisions based off. Maybe Americans would have made a different decision at the same situation, who knows? Japanese are careful.
Both sides were ready to give battle on the 7th. The MO striking force still had the advantage of surprise. They searched west and south, while Task Force 17, ignorant of the real Japanese position, searched north. In case the carrier battle didn't go well for the Americans, a task force of 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers under Rear Admiral Crace departed to block the convoy that would pass Jomard Passage. By this point, Hara had unenthusiastically launched 12 of his own Kates to boost the search. In order to safeguard his flank, he extended their southwest search to also search south. This decision would prove rather unfortunate. Hara's search planes got a sighting in this sector at 7:22. An American carrier and a cruiser were spotted.
That is supposed to be the safe spot for the refueling, the tanker for Americans, right? So how this is not a carrier, this is just a tanker, and they made a mistake. This is false reconnaissance. Whoa, human errors are the most dangerous thing in this battle is human errors, I think.
Hara hesitated, but a second plane confirmed the sighting at 7:45.
Confirmed.
By 08:15, Hara had launched a massive strike of 78 planes.
78 planes for a tanker.
However, minutes after the launch, he got another sighting of American carriers, 150 miles northwest. Turns out his original sighting was incorrect. Unbelievably, both search planes committed the same mistake and misidentified the 2 ships. Hara had just committed his strike against the wrong target.
Look how important it is to know, for example, me as an infantry, we were trained to know, to recognize enemy tanks, we were trained to recognize Russian tanks, because we need to know if this is a tank or a battle machine or a moving artillery, then we know how to destroy it and how much force to put on it. Now, if you're a naval pilot, you need to be able to recognize enemy ships, otherwise you can't identify them, and this will happen, and this is a human mistake here. They falsely recognize the wrong ships.
He declined to recall the strike. He didn't want to break radio silence, and he hoped there would be other targets of some value. The planes reached the target area, found the oiler Neosho, which by the way was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and the destroyer Sims. Both had left Fletcher the day before. The pilots spread out and wasted 2 hours searching for more valuable targets, and of course they found none, so they finally settled on these 2 secondary targets. At 15 past 12, the Sims was hit by 3 bombs. The destroyer split in half and sank with a heavy loss of life. The remaining dive bombers went for Neosho, and she was hit by 7 bombs. She survived for 4 more days and was eventually scuttled.
So this seems like a lot of loss of human life, a loss of 2 ships is probably very expensive, but still compared to the carriers it's nothing, it's a secondary target, it doesn't mean nothing. This is a loss for the Japanese. It doesn't really matter, they sunk 2 ships, it's still a loss.
The strike arrived late that afternoon. The launching of a second strike this late in the day was doubtful. However, the attack didn't compromise their position. Only Neosho had sent word at 10:21 that it was under attack by 3 planes. But these could have been long-range aircraft from Tulagi. So Fletcher was still unaware that the carriers were on his flank.
Okay.
Eerily, the Americans were practically committing the Japanese's exact mistakes. Fletcher's dawn search resulted in a sighting at 08:15. A report of 2 carriers and 4 cruisers was given.
What are the odds?
He launched a strike of 93.
They are next to each other and they're attacking outside on illusory targets that doesn't really exist. Both making the same mistakes. What the hell? Whew.
Aircraft at 9:26. Soon, the pilot that made the sighting landed on board the Yorktown and revealed that he had never spotted 2 carriers. Turns out his coding device had a malfunction, and when he reported 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, it came out as 2 carriers and 4 cruisers.
Human error and knowing your enemy's equipment is one thing. Second thing is how good is your equipment and machinery, the coding device. One small error and almost 100 planes are sent out to the wrong position. Small things are the biggest things in war. Like, this is crazy. This couldn't happen nowadays because the the coding devices are so good, and also human error. I think both sides have learned their lesson from this, and they all learn their enemy's equipment now. What are the odds? The same way.
Therefore, by about 10:15, the situation was that both carrier forces had simultaneously launched their strikes against the wrong targets. Just like Takagi, Fletcher declined to recall the strike. It pressed on. However, the American strike fared better when the report at 10:22 indicated the presence of at least one carrier there. Here you realize the foolishness in not delaying the rest of the MO operation, since the carrier striking force was behind schedule for 2 days. The vulnerable convoy had been advancing this whole time with practically no air cover except for the Shoho. The invasion force knew it had been spotted with all the sightings of aircraft overhead, so it pulled back north, but it was too late. A gap was formed between the Shoho and its protective screen of cruisers. The Shoho was in very clear weather. Her 18 aircraft would be no match against the 93 that were coming her way.
Ooh.
Lexington's air group was spotted at 10:50. Shoho had only 3 fighters in the air. Shoho made a turn to port. She skillfully dodged the first 3 bombs. Then, the next 10 bombs. She launched another 3 fighters to boost her defense. However, her luck ran out. 15 dive bombers came and scored a hit. Then another 1,000-pound bomb hit the ship. Torpedo bombers conducted an anvil attack and hit her with 5 torpedoes. The ship was now crippled. The Yorktown squadrons came next at 11:25. They should have ignored her and gone for other targets, but they didn't. They landed another 5 to 6 more hits on the carrier and another 2 to 5 torpedo hits. In total, they had overkill on this carrier with about 12 hits and 7 torpedoes.
Definitely overkill.
At 11:31, abandon ship was ordered. All 18 planes were lost either by ditching or being destroyed, all for the loss of 3 American aircraft. The Shoho had a heavy loss of life and was the first Japanese carrier to be sunk in the war.
Alright.
The invasion force dispersed in terror, and all the forces not involved with dealing with the American carriers were ordered to temporarily withdraw north. Fletcher's force was recovered by 13:16, but he was hesitant to launch a second strike against the convoy because he still didn't know where the main Japanese force was. He knew of the loss of the Sims and the Neosho, but that still didn't pinpoint the exact location of the carriers.
They're so close to each other.
Also on the 7th, Crace's cruiser force was spotted and attacked by a force of 31 bombers and 11 fighters in the afternoon. Luckily, none of the ships were hit. He was even attacked by 3 friendly B-17s by accident, but also survived that without a scratch.
That gives us an idea of how difficult it is to bomb a ship from a plane. We see that huge ships like aircraft carriers can dodge torpedoes and they can dodge bombs, which means it's really hard to hit that target. If you're moving so fast and the ship is moving and it's all sea and they can move everywhere, you need a lot of luck there. Or you need to be kamikaze when you can actually aim yourself at the ship.
The Japanese heard about Shoho's loss and were eager for revenge. With the number of aircraft involved during the Shoho attack, it was clear that 2 carriers were on the loose. Only now were the Japanese inclined to take risk. They decided to make a dusk attack, a long-range search and destroy mission with their best pilots. Based on a sighting at 16:15, they sent 27 bombers to search west. Mind you, these pilots have just returned from a 7-hour mission and were exhausted. The strike was launched, but the weather was terrible, and they ended up missing the Americans. American radar detected the flight and an ambush was set up on a portion of them. 9 were shot down.
Oh my god!
The rest continued their mission, unaware that they had passed the enemy fleet. They finally gave up, jettisoned their bombs and torpedoes to lighten their weight and headed back home. And it was only on the return trip that they run into the Americans, but they didn't have their bombs anymore. And something noteworthy happened. In all the confusion settling that night, some Japanese aircraft actually tried to land on the Yorktown, thinking it was their own carrier. They quickly sped away when they received anti-aircraft fire. Hera turned on his searchlights and the remaining 18 were able to land. But the loss of 9 bombers and their elite pilots in this desperate attempt will be sorely missed the next day. The carriers were about 100.
What a situation! You tried to land on the wrong... Back then you didn't have radars, you didn't have sensors that could help you in the dark. You had to trust your own eyes to find the ship that you have to land to, and of course you will land on an enemy ship if it's approximately on the same place where your ship is supposed to be. What a situation. Also, you ditch your bombs, right? And then you find the enemy ships. I mean, then the only way is kamikaze, guys. You don't have weapons anymore.
100 miles away from each other at 2000 hours. Fletcher finally knew the location of the carriers. The Japanese trump card of surprise had been thrown away. In the 24-hour period that straddled the 6th and the 7th, the Japanese lost 2 good opportunities to force battle on the American carriers when the odds were in their favor. On the afternoon of the 6th, had the Japanese attacked, they would have found the Americans in the process of refueling. And on the 7th, the Japanese were on the rear of a distracted enemy and squandered their chance by launching their strike against secondary targets. Had they found and attacked Task Force 17 and not the Neosho in the Sims, the Japanese would have caught them by surprise while they were attacking the Shoho. And so now, battle was assured for the 8th. The Japanese would now give battle more or less on the basis of equality and with an enemy alerted to their presence.
So no surprise of the moment. Right now it's face against face, just who has the better equipment and better pilots. Luck has almost no play anymore compared to the days before. Japanese luck has just run out. They don't have the surprise moment anymore at all. And I feel like American fighters and carriers are a bit better also, technology-wise. Alright, now we get to the point. It's the Battle of Coral Sea.
This day, cloud cover had moved and was now over the Japanese force. Both Fletcher and Takagi found what they were looking for. The Americans launched a full 360-degree search at 0625.
360,
and at
that's
0820, the Japanese were spotted 175 miles away. On this day, Fletcher had 117 operational aircraft. He dispatched a striking force of 75 planes. By 0925, the 2 air groups proceeded separately. The Japanese search aircraft were launched at 0615 and made a spotting at 0822. The MO striking force had fewer aircraft, 95 operational planes, but managed to put together a strike of 69 planes. Almost simultaneously, both strikes occurred.
What? What the hell? Simultaneously?
The Yorktown dive bombers spotted the Japanese carriers at 10:32. They decided to wait for the torpedo bombers to catch up, but it wasn't worth it. This 20-minute delay allowed the Zuikaku to disappear under the clouds. Also, this allowed more Japanese fighters to be launched to strengthen the air defense. At 10:57, the attack finally commenced. The planes of Yorktown and Lexington attacked separately, and Shokaku, being the only carrier visible, took the brunt of the entire attack. The first 7 bombs missed. Then came 17 dive bombers. A bomb struck the bow, which started a fire. The rest of the squadron followed. One of her pilots, Lieutenant John J. Powers, with his aircraft already damaged, dived well below 1,000 feet to ensure a hit. He wasn't able to pull out the dive in time, and both he and his rear gunner were killed. His bomb hit shattered the flight deck of the Shokaku. His bravery earned him a posthumous Medal of Honor. The torpedo bombers came next and launched from extreme range, and all of them missed.
Oh!
By 11:05, Shokaku had been hit by 2 bombs and was popping in and out of cloud cover. Half an hour later came Lexington's strike. However, 14 planes never even made it to the target because they got lost in the bad weather, so only 22 made the attack. 4 dive bombers came and scored 1 hit at 11:40. The remaining 12 torpedo bombers came and launched their torpedoes, but again, they all missed. By 11:50, the attack was over.
But if you know anything about it, if you have worked on aircraft carriers, if aircraft carrier receives 2 hits on deck, can you still use it to launch aircraft? If it has holes on the runway ground, you can't really launch your aircraft, right? If they don't have vertical liftoff. They don't. By my reckoning, this would be out of battle right now. You couldn't even use it for launching. Or could you? Can they fix it really fast somehow? Because if you have a hole and you drive through it with the plane wheels, the plane will break. This is my simple mind trying to get this, but maybe there's some trick here I don't see.
It was a poor performance. Although they managed to strike the Shokaku with 3 heavy 1,000-pound bombs, she was in no immediate danger of sinking.
Okay.
The attack had cost the Americans 2 dive bombers and 3 Wildcats.
That's not a
The
big
Japanese
loss.
Combat Air Patrol lost only 2 fighters. After the attack, the Shokaku had to depart the area, leaving the Zuikaku as the sole carrier.
It didn't sink, but they knocked it out of the battle for a little while. It had to depart the area, and now the strike back force from the Japanese is half the size it was before. So they strike first. This is the main thing here. They took one of the carriers out of the battle for some time at least.
The Japanese attack differed greatly in coordination and precision. Warrant Officer Kanyo Kenzo, the pilot who made the original sighting, was on his way back to his carrier. He made a heroic sacrifice by turning back to lead the strike accurately to its target. This spelled a death sentence for him and his crew, who now wouldn't have enough fuel to return. His plane would be shot down shortly after the battle. For their bravery, the three men would be awarded a posthumous letter of commendation, personally signed by Admiral Yamamoto. Radar detected the Japanese strike at 10:55. They were 68 miles out. The Americans sent 5 fighters to intercept them, but they missed them. Remember that radar interception was in its infancy at this stage of the war.
Yeah, okay.
The Japanese were to launch a superior coordinated strike with both their torpedo and dive bombing squadrons. Of the 18 Kates, 14 selected the Lexington, and 4 would go for the Yorktown. Of the 33 dive bombers, 19 went for the Lexington and 14 for the Yorktown. A wave of anti-aircraft fire greeted the Japanese, and the Lexington turned to starboard. The Lexington was able to avoid damage for several minutes, once even allowing a pair of torpedoes to pass her on both sides. At 11:20, her luck ran out against the torpedoes, and she was hit in quick succession by 2 on her port side.
Okay, oh.
Dive bombers got 2 hits on the Lexington, but overall, the dive bombing attack caused minor damage.
2 torpedoes, 2 dive bombs, 4 hits in total, and still is some minor damage. How strong are the carriers? Seems like the 12 hits we talked about before wasn't an overkill. This was what you need to sink something like this. 4 hits, for me, I would think, oh, this is enough, Lexington is out. No, it can take 4 hits and probably take 6 more or something.
Although the Lexington had suffered 2 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits, she could still conduct flight operations and keep at a good 24 knots.
How? How strong are these ships?
The Yorktown was more maneuverable and was able to dodge all the torpedoes. But she was hit by a 500-pound bomb, and it went through 6 decks before finally exploding.
Ooh.
Despite the effort of 20 Wildcats and 23 Dauntlesses on combat air patrol, Japanese losses were light. 5 dive bombers and 8 torpedo bombers were lost to the Americans. American losses were 3 Wildcats and 5 Dauntlesses. However, on the return trip, the Japanese had to ditch 7 aircraft, and 12 more were thrown off the decks after they had landed. So in total, Japanese suffered more losses during the 8th.
Thrown off the decks? They had to throw them off the decks? Why? I don't understand. Well, I guess they had the reasons, but yeah. And they had to ditch 7. What about those pilots? They just gonna be left there to die? I don't know.
Striking Force lost 34 aircraft in combat, as opposed to 19 for Task Force 17. But there was trouble on the Lexington. As the day went on, her condition grew worse as explosions rattled the ship. There was an explosion at 12:47, then a huge one at 14:42, and then a third one at 15:25. Soon, fires began to spread uncontrollably throughout the carrier. It was then clear that she wouldn't be saved. After the crew had been rescued, the carrier was scuttled. Of her crew of 2,951, 216 men died. The Lexington took with her 35 aircraft still on board, leaving the Yorktown with only 39 aircraft. Fletcher had no option but to withdraw. This battle had already cost the Pacific Fleet 1/4 of its carrier's strength. But on the flip side, the Japanese situation also didn't look promising. The Zuikaku was left with, oddly enough, 39 operational planes. Fuel was down because of all the fuel interruptions, pilots were fatigued, and with this low aircraft strength, the carrier striking force was not capable of supporting the invasion force, so they wisely pulled back. The battlefield did lay in Japanese hands. The Japanese could have pushed forward and taken Port Moresby with little opposition. All that was left were Army land-based bombers who posed little threat to ships underway at sea. But again, this is hindsight. Back then, it would have been ludicrous to send a vulnerable convoy without sufficient air cover.
Yeah.
Operation MO was over. Casualties were as follows for the Allied forces. The Americans lost the Lexington, a valuable fleet oiler, and a destroyer. 66 planes were lost and personal casualties were at 543. For the Japanese, they lost a light carrier, a destroyer, and several auxiliaries. The Japanese lost 77 planes and 1,074 men. The Japanese lost 90 aircrew compared to the Americans who lost only 35. But strictly speaking in tonnage and material loss, the Japanese had a tactical victory here. But it was a strategic victory for the Americans because it had stopped the first Japanese offensive since the beginning of the war, and it prevented the Port Moresby invasion. The Japanese would later try to take Port Moresby overland, and it would fail. The threat to Australia was put away for good.
They saved Australia.
Equally important was that this engagement had knocked off 2 carriers off the order of battle for the upcoming Midway operation. The Americans had devastated Zuikaku's air group and damaged the Shokaku, so that ultimately none would be able to participate in Midway. This could have been offset though if the Japanese had been luckier. On May 8th, only 4 torpedo bombers went after the Yorktown. 8 more could have been added to this attack if they hadn't been lost in the desperate night mission the day before. Had the Japanese placed a single torpedo hit on the Yorktown, history would have been altered. Even if the Yorktown had survived, she certainly would not have been repaired in time to participate in the Midway battle, where, as we know, her aircraft would end up playing an important role. Instead, it would now just be 4 carriers for the Midway operation. Oh well, they should be able to handle themselves. Yamamoto was confident in his forces.
Ooh, I love this. I love this type of videos. Very detailed, very detailed. Channel is Montemeo and they make videos like this. I love this type of battle analysis. They don't have any more good videos for me to watch. This is all. But yes, this battle set the tone for Midway, and we can see it has direct consequences because 2 less carriers for Japanese. I think if they had 2 extra, things might have been different for Midway. If you like this stuff, if you like these videos, support the channel. Best way is through Patreon, the link is in the description below. Or become a member of this channel to get early access to all of my videos. Thank you for watching, my friends, and as always, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.